right?
Michael, the founders were obviously great students of Rome. So much of it echoed and or stolen or just simply mimicked. Don't you think that are you saying that you believe that the founders thought that they were creating something that would last forever? I mean, being such students of history and of Rome, wouldn't they have necessarily believed that there was a finite time period to what they were doing?
Yes, I'm just saying you can look when you read, what one of their mottos, Novos Order Seclorum, New Order for the Ages. They justify in the early Federalist Papers. They use the phrase more than once, but certainly once, that the reason why we can build this new republic at the territorial extent that we can, they say republics are a problem. They've failed throughout history. Why are we making this new, if Curtis were there, he would say, don't make this new government a republic. It's going to fail. The founders realized this was a serious argument. That in fact, Curtis's opinion in the 1770s and 80s that republics will fail was much more prevalent among elites than that the republic might succeed, which is why they have to spend the first 14 Federalist Papers defending their choice to make the United States a republic and not some other form of government, because the presumption is that republics are discredited and will not work and will not last. And they use the phrase in justifying themselves. At one point they used, I forgot which number it's in, but they use the phrase new science of politics. In other words, we've learned things that the ancients and the medievals and prior political actors didn't know. That new knowledge makes this thing is going to be better and on a firmer basis. Now, they don't anywhere, as far as I can recall, say this is going to last forever. But there's a kind of implication that, no, if we've solved all of these problems, maybe it will. All I'm saying is...
born in hubris. Curtis.
No, I don't mean that. I don't mean that, because being a just last point, being a Hillsdale Claremont person, I'm not really allowed to disparage the founding, to say the least. All I'm saying is we all have to come at any kind of political, when we're thinking about the wand, we all have to come at it with a certain humility, that even if you have magic, there's probably a whole bunch of things that you can't achieve. And so you got to lower your expectations and therefore not lower your intentions. Don't be too messianic or too utopian. Try to, as I said, try to do the best you can for as long as you can, realizing that will neither be perfection, nor will it be perpetual.
Magic isn't good enough to change history. That's awesome. Curtis.
Well, I'm a big fan of Napoleon. In fact, there's a book I always recommend, which has now become, unfortunately, a little expensive in used books, called The Mind of Napoleon, which is just a collection of his sayings, of his writings that was put together in the 50s by some professor. And if you can find it before anyone else, I recommend doing that. Napoleon, I particularly like this book because I gave it to a prominent startup guy at one point, and he loved it and started recommending to everyone else too, because Napoleon was a startup guy, and Napoleon dealt with this promise of creating a Novus Ordo Seclorum in a much more in a very different way, because Napoleon, the closest equivalent of Napoleon on our side of the pond is, of course, Hamilton, and Hamilton himself was in some ways one of the least philosophical of the founders. Hamilton was a very practical guy. He certainly was not, he wasn't a firebrand of the streets like James Otis or something. Can I deprecate? Would you be allowed to, what about Sam Adams and James Otis? Can you say bad things about them? In like Claremont political correctness, the Samuel Adams.
You have
Adams
vastly greater freedom than I do to say whatever you want.
We're all constrained by YouTube, though. Don't forget.
So that is true. That is true. I'll keep it philosophical, and but the thing is, my philosophy is, in a way, it's sort of my political philosophy is in some ways the opposite of Michael Anton's, which is that I think the way forward is in a sense out of philosophy rather than into it. And so, Michael is like, let's work hard on developing the philosophy of what is the right, what is the good government. Let's think hard about this. Let's have our seminars. And I'm like, this does not really sound like the survival imperative to me. What sounds like the survival imperative to me is much more along the lines of, okay, you're 70 million people out there. Each of you has this little slice of power. You have these little ideas about what the future should be. You're like, I'm for this, I'm for that, I'm against this, I'm against that. No, forget all of that. Your philosophy doesn't matter. What matters is, are you for it or are you against it? Which side are you on? And that's sort of what happens naturally as the society sort of I recently read that I think a majority of Americans describe the country as being in a cold civil war. And as you sort of move toward war, you move towards kind of focusing that energy. And that, when you think about politics and you think about voting, that should change the way you think in a kind of survival imperative sense. And if I could wave the wand, the one thing that I would say to Americans when they vote is that they're sort of not voting in the right spirit, because they're kind of voting in this kind of participatory sense to feel like they're in charge of something. They're kind of voting in this kind of Aristotelian sense of participating. That is not the sense in which they're the most powerful. And when it's the survival instinct, when survival is really the question, and the only way that you can survive is by getting enough power to build a fire, and in this case, the fire either happens or it doesn't, and the fire is essentially regime change, then you need to think about the way you vote in a very different way. Because when you vote today, you're sort of thinking, oh, I'm going to send Donald Trump to Washington, and he's going to be my delegate. And he's going to do, I want to build the wall, so I'm going to send Mr. Trump to Washington, and he's going to build the wall for me. Gets done, okay, the wall isn't built, or it has all these holes in it. Oh, well, Mr. Trump failed me. No, actually, the way you have to vote if you want to be effective is you want to say, I have this power. I don't know what to do with this power. I'm going to give it all to Senor Trump. And you have to sort of enter into this kind of very south of the border spirit of caudillismo. And one of the theories about why Trump did so well with Hispanics is not that he's so politically correct, but that they're basically racist and fascist to an extent that we don't really understand here in this country. And they responded to Trump's caudillismo. And which was clearly, to compare Trump to a caudillo is like, certainly in the rhetoric, it's there, right? And so the thing is that the spirit, of course, not so much in the action, right? And the spirit of caudillismo, like,
some say that as a lament, I might add.
Porfirio Diaz, yeah, action. There are many. Let me explain how I interpret action. Porfirio Diaz, in Mexico, his guys. He was not of the Mexican nobility. I think he had more of an Indian background, or at least a mestizo background. His guys were called the científicos, and they were basically like, okay, start up Mexico. What are we going to build? What are we going to do? And if you imagine essentially startup America run by startup guys, I don't even care what color they are. I mean, not the color of their skin, but even the color of their politics doesn't matter at a certain level. Just burning all of this stuff down and changing it out with people with, Blue Caesar, if you will, people with completely identical politics, but a structure that actually works, and completely different personnel, that's enough. I don't care about the philosophies. And I don't think Americans should care about the philosophies either. I think they should think like Napoleon.
What I was going back to was your comment earlier, which I think you made in a friendly way, but came off as disparaging. Is like, well, he cares about all this philosophy. Look, when your survival is at stake, well, behind every decision, behind even every contemplation about what kind of action you're going to take is, when you say, well, what do I do now? Right? Okay, you're evaluating that based on what you think is good versus what you think is bad. Okay, so just a basic question. It seems self-evident. Survival is good. How do you know that? Unless you've thought about it, right? So philosophy lurks behind every single question you could ask.
Sure.
The fundamental question of Greek philosophy is, of course, how should I live? Right? So before you know what to do, before you can make a decision about what to do, whether that's a political decision or a personal decision or whatever, presupposes an evaluation, a hierarchy of ends, of goods and bads that you've thought through. And where philosophy comes in is it says, we know that this hierarchy of ends already exists in public opinion, but if we subject that public opinion to analysis, we realize that it's contradictory or it's flawed or it's illogical. And I'm not saying that, the answer is for all of us to just sit around and read books and debate. What I am saying is that but you do need some people to do that, I think, or whether you need them or not, inevitably some people are going to do that whether you want them to or not. However, if we're going to go forward to what any of us wants, even if we presume that the three of us all want different things, right? Whatever future Curtis that you want, or what I want, or what Jack wants, or what any listener wants, all of that presupposes an idea of the good and then a prudential account of how we approach the good, of how we avoid the bad and get to the good, which requires thinking. Right? It's not.
It does. And And it requires and this is required in practice as well as theory. I should pitch my Substack is actually one of the things. My paywalled articles are a book, and my book is about Gray Mirror, is about this subject of, what do you do when you wave the magic wand, and that includes the telos. That includes the question of what should this world look like? Should it look like fully automated luxury communism? Should it look like the pasture full of last men? No, I don't think so. I don't think any of us think that. And answering that question and answering how sort of humanity constructs itself in a way that makes it remain human is in some ways the ultimate question. And I think where I differ from that is I cannot imagine anything that could be described as a successor regime not grappling with that question at a very existential level, simply because it would have to. And if it was not an existential regime change, if it was simply a cosmetic regime change, and the level of sort of things that are in between fake and real is dwindling constantly, it's becomes more and more Boolean, more and more true false every day. And so the question of sort of how this next regime would contemplate reality is very, very important. But if you can't really even agree that the only word that you need to say to the present regime is no, this doesn't work for me. No, we don't have to live this way. And you basically, the problem is that once you get into philosophy, you find yourself instantly engaged in this Laocoon-like debate with the frame in which you exist. And this frame, which is this frame we inherited from the 20th century, is just has no redeeming qualities as far as I can tell. And so, it's actually very easy. Politics is the art of cohering sort of many, many small efforts on a single point. It's like focusing a laser. And so to me, it's very, very easy to focus the laser on the word no. It's very hard to focus the laser on let's debate what the government should have the right vision of, the $15 minimum wage or whatever. And so those are thinking in those different ways and sort of pulling you out of the thing that I support philosophy completely. The problem is that when you think of philosophy as sort of your political method, it pulls you into this quagmire that's very hard to get out of.